All right. All right. Hey everybody. There's a lot that I guess I really could just talk about, but right now I wanted to talk about the situation that I had with my truck. Um so usually, and I know it's like super random, but there are just like a bunch of things that I've kind of just been wanting to talk about in general, and usually I'll like journal things down or like categorize things down in some kind of notebook or something. That way, like I can actually have my thoughts laid out. But being able to actually talk and get them out of my mouth also feels well too, rather than just looking at a screen and typing something up or pulling out a book and writing until like my wrist cramps. So this video, I just wanted to talk about this problem that I had with my truck. Um, Usually when it comes to like repairing vehicles at my home, we have like a set amount of mechanics that we go to get something fixed up, but usually we'll work on things ourselves if it's like something minor. Like I know people who, like when it comes to oil changes, they don't know how to add oil to their vehicle, they don't know how to check the oil in their vehicle, they don't know how to change the oil in their vehicle, which I can't necessarily blame people for not knowing how to change it, just because that process is a little more labor than it is to actually like check it, add it, so on and so forth. Um, I know people who don't know how to change tires that I've taught how to change tires, people who don't know how to jump start cars, people who don't know where coolant in their car goes or where water in their car goes, and so on and so forth. You know, like this list goes on and on. When I was younger, I had a PT Cruiser, which is a car that at the time, and I'm sure it still is to this day, is known for breaking down religiously. And what would happen is my car would break down pretty much weekly. And I didn't know anything about like repairing cars or fixing on cars at the time, so I was really just like lost and always having these excess problems with it. And it wasn't until my dad, you know, got sick and tired of having to work on it every week that he decided to like start teaching me how to do it as well. Plus, you know, he was saying that was just like a skill that I would have to learn. So, yeah, I started working on a PT Cruiser, and it would break down like weekly, and there was a lot of stuff about it that you know you couldn't just replace or fix up without basically changing the entirety of the vehicle. But because of all of like the long, harsh days that I went through driving it, even though you know it is like my baby or was my baby, I um I learned how to work on a lot of other vehicles. So, well, I don't want to say a lot like I'm just some expert mechanic, but enough to where, like, if something happens to one of my vehicles, I know how to fix up on it, or I know, like, the general area of where it might be, or, you know, I could look up something online and probably have a better chance of fixing it myself than, like, taking it to, like, a mechanic or whatever the case may be. Um, Plus, in like my history, a lot of mechanics would actually fix the problem, but then create a new problem, you know? And it would just be this big mix where I'm always running back to a mechanic to get something fixed. And it wasn't always my money being taken out. Sometimes it would be my parents, other times it would be my own. And I'm not gonna lie, spending over 100 like every other week or every few months or whatever the case may be, usually what feels like spur of the moment, just to go back to the same person or the same sets of people to fix something that should have been fixed, you know, the first time it was being worked on is very frustrating. So I'm about to move into like my truck now. So my truck, a handful of things were busted in it. You know, originally it was like the belt, and it kept snapping, and eventually mechanic helped put the belt back on and like helped put it all together again, and I was good, right? But over a while my like turning was very tight, very sharp, very rough. When it got too rough and I turned too like too hard, too tight, that's when the belt would snap. So after some time, we realized that there's a leak. I believe they said somewhere near the power steering pump, if not in the power steering pump, that makes it so that whenever I'm driving my truck, I have a better chance of running out of power steering fluid because it ultimately will just leak, right? All right, cool. That just lets me know I need to get, some anti-leak stuff as well as just power steering fluid to take with me non-stop, right? And that's what I was doing. It never really like foolproof fixed the issue, but it did make things a little more bearable and breathable, and I was fine with that. So what ends up happening in a few weeks, maybe a few months, is that it's not just the power steering that's going out, the coolant is, and the oil is having a little mix of its own too. Pretty much everything under the hood that you can refill on your own was like having its own dramatic episodes. So I had to figure out, what was going on, and obviously went to my dad to try to figure some stuff out. We went to a mechanic or two. They looked over some things, checked some things, and we found out that ultimately I just need to fill my truck with coolant, power steering fluid, and occasionally oil. What felt like at least once a week, every week. So the oil was fine. I'm pretty used to how the oil and everything works, how much my truck usually takes, to an extent, how much my truck usually burns. So that was fine. I was cool. My biggest problems were the power steering fluid and the coolant, and this was a doozy, and I will explain why. So there was supposed to be a leak in the power steering pump, right? So no matter how much power steering fluid I poured inside the truck, it would always lose like the fluid. So it was always losing the fluid, and it wasn't just the power steering fluid. Like over time, like I said, it would also become the coolant. So what would happen when your vehicle doesn't have enough coolant is it will run hot, and your cold air will turn into hot air. Sometimes it'll get like smoky. It'll smell funny, and then if you don't have enough power steering fluid inside your vehicle, turning will become extremely like troublesome. It'll feel like you're turning like the wheel to an old timey pirate. It'll feel like you're turning the wheel to an old timey pirate ship. It will be like incredibly difficult, and when it comes to like turning in like roundabouts or cul-de-sacs or sharp turns in parking lots, it'll be pretty much like impossible, actually impossible. Instead of taking like a 3-point turn, you'll have to take like a 20-point turn. I am not exaggerating. You will have to turn religiously because turning will become an extreme challenge. So eventually, I started refilling the power steering fluid what felt like every week, sometimes more than once every week. But the coolant was a whole other beast. So my dad at the time wasn't there to actually tell me where exactly it was supposed to go, but he was telling me don't put it in a radiator, because there was something going on with my radiator that he wasn't too sure about. So he was telling me to ask one of the workers at one of the car stores that I went to get the supplies to refill everything where it was supposed to go. And if I wasn't supposed to put in a radiator, there's only one other place that I saw that I actually could put it in, and that was the same place that the worker told me to put it in. Pause. So I ended up pouring the coolant in that like compartment of the truck, and what would happen was that compartment would leak the coolant almost instantly. Sometimes it would leak it almost instantly, drain it almost the complete way out. Other times it would just let it sit in there, and I ended up taking like anti like leaking coolant and pouring it in there, and just over the course of like 2 to 4 months, I just kept refilling this bin, practically feeling like I'm going in debt paying for stuff for my truck weekly, right? So, like I said, this goes on for a while, and I'm just thugging it out by this point. It's whatever. Tell me why. Tell me why. By the time I've spent enough to where like I finally had enough, and I'm trying to figure out exactly where the spill is because I'm seeing like the drain underneath the truck, I let my dad know, hey, it's been X amount of months. This leak isn't stopping. I put the anti-leak stuff you told me to put in. I put the anti-leak stuff that like I found at the store that I put in. You know, I've been using these other anti-leak fluids with it and refilling it like weekly and nothing's working. And I was telling him, yeah, like I was putting in the container that you told me to put in. He's like, container? What container are you talking about? Oh, you told me to put in the container. You said avoid the pump. He said, I never said avoid the pump. I said pour it in the pump. I said, no, you did not. So you're telling me that it's not supposed to be in a container? He's like, no, that's for a completely different kind of coolant, which would explain why the container was always pouring out the coolant that I poured in it. It was rejecting it because it wasn't meant to be in there. I thought it was rejecting it because there was a hole in the pump. And when I was telling my dad that, he was like, hole in the pump? Like, no, there should only be one, in the power steering. There might be something wrong with your radiator, but not to the point to where, like, it should be pouring like that. And so, after he told me that, a few days go by, and I don't have to keep refilling my coolant. My coolant is perfectly fine. In fact, I only pour coolant in if, like, the actual coolant's low. And it turns out, I guess it hasn't really ever been getting low. And because I've been putting stuff in the other coolant container, I feel like some of it was going to the coolant, but there's a possibility that I could have also been overflowing the actual coolant as well. So I was basically like making my truck worse while also making my overall driving experience worse because of like this whole misunderstanding, right? And I mean, now that I've finally known it, I just feel super stupid naturally, right? I've just been thugging it out, dealing with like the worst thing possible for a vehicle, and I didn't have to. My truck would be hotter than it should have been certain days because I just had a misunderstanding. It would be blowing air weird. It would be smelling weird if I put too much oil in or maybe not enough oil while also putting stuff in the wrong coolant container. My truck would start blowing out smoke like I was trying to like have you ever seen like mustard gas on like a war zone? That's what it looks like coming out of my truck. Except instead of it being like yellow and whatever other colors mustard gas will attach itself to, it was mainly white, gray, and black. And it would just fumigate the entire highway behind me. And I had no idea what was going on or why. Now that I finally know, I feel so stupid. Because mind you, when I had the PT Cruiser, I would usually like stomach the heat. I would sweat. I'd go days. No. I would go literal months without air in that small little car during summer days where the degrees was over 100 because I had classes like at college, and when I didn't have classes I was hanging out with friends or meeting new people, and they meet me and here I am most likely smelling like must and looking like I just came out of a swimming pool, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with me, and I gotta let them know, hey, the heat knocked the air out of my car and I've just been dealing with it this whole time. So I thought it was one of those things I was just gonna have to deal with while in the truck as well. And now that I found out it's just a misunderstanding, hey, I'm back in business. I can drive smooth now. So that was just a little update. That okay. I mean, I can't drive smooth without paying for power steering fluid, but hear me out. I'd rather spend about $20 to $40 on several containers of power steering fluid than have to spend like $60 to $80 on power steering fluid and coolant, especially when I don't need it. And then maybe even a little more when I'm like tagging oil on top of all that, right? So, yeah, I just learned just something a little bit dealing with cars, hopefully. Other than that, if you're going through something similar, I'd say, make sure you're pouring it in the right spot. And be careful of the mechanics you go to because they will scam you. They most likely, most definitely will scam you. Especially if you sound like you don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, that's it. Peace.